The photo loaded before I was ready for it. Afternoon light pooled on my kitchen counter, the kind that makes a glass of water glow, and my phone hummed against the oak. On the screen, my sister stood beside a brand new Mercedes black paint, like wet ink, a red bow so large it shadowed the hood. Mom and Dad flanked her jawlines, softened by pride, all three faces turned into the clean, uncomplicated joy of people who believe they are exactly where they belong. The caption said, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, best birthday ever." My coffee went cold in my hand as something small and stubborn inside me finally cracked with a quiet final sound. If you've ever watched other people celebrate in the exact space you were erased from, you'll know that silence is louder than shouting. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. I want to know your corner of the world. And if you've ever had to measure your worth without your family's applause, tap like and subscribe. There are more stories like this, and you won't want to miss the next one. But to understand why that red bow felt like a verdict, you need to know where it began. I grew up in Westfield, Connecticut, on a street lined with maples that turned the world to fire every October. My father, James Williams, shaped arguments for a living and liked his shirt starched to knife edges. My mother, Diana, taught literature and could find the soft place in any story, including ours. On Sunday mornings, Dad flipped pancakes until they were as round as coins, and Mom's laughter ran ahead of her like warm air. When you're a child in a house like that, you memorize the music before you learn the words. From the beginning, our girl meant excellence. Report cards were read aloud at the oak table. Comments from teachers were clipped and saved. I learned to speak fluent adult schedule results next steps before I learned to be messy. I loved art with the kind of hunger you don't expect at 8, graphite smudges on my fingers, color wheels spinning behind my eyes. But I also learned the sound of approval, and it was addictive. Yes, that's our girl, keep going, don't slow down. Natalie arrived 4 years later, a bundle of pink knit and blinking blue eyes, and I moved over without complaint. I read her stories, tied her shoes, introduced her to hide and seek in the backyard until fireflies came out like sparks. We were different from the start, and our differences made a pattern my parents seemed to see before we did. When I brought home an A-, Dad slid a tutoring plan across the table. When Natalie stumbled, Mom stroked her hair and said, "Math isn't her strength," as if compassion were a grade she could award. None of that felt cruel in the moment. It felt like weather always present, shaping you without announcing itself. I adapted the way children do. I straightened my spine at piano recitals. I learned to swim until my shoulders ached. I practiced the art of not needing anything that might be inconvenient. Senior year, my world narrowed into 2 choices, the one I wanted and the one that would keep the house quiet. In the studio after school, Miss Daniels stood behind me at the drafting table, her shadow tracing my hand. "You have an eye," she said, tapping a sketch where I'd opened a room by moving a window, letting winter light fall across a table. "This is work worth your life." She handed me a list, RISD Parsons names that sounded like doors. That night at dinner, I tried to set the list beside the salmon and roasted potatoes as if it were just another dish. Dad's fork paused midair. "Art school with your mind." He laughed once, the dry kind that scrapes a throat. Mom kept her voice gentle, her hand on my wrist. "You could be a doctor, honey. Imagine the stability, the respect." I looked from his certainty to her softness and felt the table tilt. Respect. I thought like a locked room with a small, high window. I folded the list and put it back in my pocket. I chose pre-med because choosing peace had become my second language. At Yale, my planner filled itself organic chemistry lab hours, a research slot Dad helped me secure. I called home every Tuesday and Thursday evening, reporting bloodless numbers, scores, schedules, deadlines, while watching a part of me grow pale. At the studio on the second floor, where the architecture students pinned wild ideas to cork walls, I stood in the doorway like someone eyeing life through glass. When the panic attacks arrived, they were quiet. Breath catching in my throat at odd angles, palms buzzing, as if bees had taken up residence in my skin. I blamed caffeine, then exhaustion, then a bad chair. But the truth was simple and heavy. I was aimed at a life that wasn't mine, and the more I complied, the more I disappeared. I remember the night I decided to call home because the light looked different. Rain ticked against the dorm window, and the desk lamp haloed 2 letters, one stamped in a hospital's navy crest for a prestigious summer internship, the other typed on thin paper from a design firm in New York that wanted someone to learn and work and keep their eyes open. I dialed. Dad answered on the 3rd ring paper, rustling a pen tapping. "Make it quick, kiddo," he said, distracted affection like a coat tossed on a chair. "I'm changing my major," I said carefully, like walking across ice. "I'm leaving pre-med." A silence opened that I could feel on my teeth. "To what?" he asked. "Throw your future at paint." Mom's voice drifted in from the background. "James, let's hear her." But he was already rising the way storms do all at once. "We invested years in this," he said, each word crisp. "Do you understand how many calls I made for that internship?" "You're not doing this. I'm miserable," I said, and the word felt indecent, like raising your voice in church. "Design isn't finger painting," I added too quickly. "It's problem solving. He cut me off with my full name, the one that never arrived without punishment. "If you throw away your future on a whim," he said, "don't expect us to fund it. Your college money is for a real education." He didn't slam the door because phones don't slam, but you can still hear one close. The next morning, the bursar's office sent a balance I couldn't afford. By Friday, the lease for the hospital-adjacent apartment they'd secured for senior year was canceled. Mom kept calling in low tones. "Give him time, sweetheart," as if time were a solvent that could lift old stains. I learned the names of loan officers. I learned the weight of split rent in a narrow New Haven apartment where the radiators clanged like stubborn ghosts. I learned the relief of a studio that smelled like paper and graphite and effort. I also learned that love with conditions doesn't recognize you without your uniform. When I came home that Christmas, my bedroom smelled faintly of carpet glue. The desk, where I'd done calculus and sketched chairs, had been replaced with a filing cabinet. Dad called it using the space. Mom made up the pullout in the basement and set a lamp on a stack of old magazines as if that made it softer. At dinner, Natalie's first semester stories ran like a stream. She'd decided on Law Columbia in her sights, and Dad's eyes lit with a familiar, unguarded pride that skipped my plate and landed elsewhere. I brought dishes to the sink and caught my reflection in the kitchen window, older than the last time I looked. Mom dried her hands on a towel and said, "He'll come around," but her voice floated like a wish sent up a chimney. Around us, the house wore our history family photos, climbing the staircase, the dent in the hallway from a dropped box of encyclopedias, but the frame had shifted. I could feel it in my bones, like weather rolling in. When Natalie announced law out loud, Dad went to his study and returned with a small velvet box. Inside lay his grandfather's gold pocket watch, the heirloom reserved for a Williams who joined the work. He pressed it into her palm, and the air in the room turned ceremonial. I got a bookstore gift card and a careful smile. It wasn't cruelty. It was arithmetic, this, for that reward for alignment. It still took my breath away. Back at school, I worked 2 jobs and learned to cook cheap. On Sundays, I walked past a church with high windows and the choir's voices lifted through the stone. I couldn't make out words, only feeling grace threaded through with ache. In the studio, I stayed until the custodian flicked the lights twice. My life finally sounded like mine, even if it rattled. When Natalie's acceptance letter to Columbia Law arrived, my mother's Facebook lit like a Christmas tree. Photos in front of the Eiffel Tower appeared a month later, Dad in a scarf, Mom laughing, Natalie in sunglasses. The date stamped the same week as my birthday. I stared at the screen in my small apartment, a paper plate cooling on my knees, and told myself it was bad timing, nothing more. Later, when I called Mom, said, "Perfect timing, really," and described gelato and cobblestones with the innocent joy of someone who doesn't know she's stepping on your hand. Birthdays have a way of telling the truth even when no one speaks. On the morning I turned 28, I checked my phone and found only weather alerts and a sale on winter coats. By 6 that evening, I had reapplied lipstick twice, not to see anyone, just to give the mirror something hopeful. At 9, I blew out candles on a supermarket cake with colleagues who'd pulled me into a booth and shouted the song off key. On the walk home, the city's steam rose through street grates like the breath of some giant animal, and the Charles River carried neon in broken lines. The silence from Westfield filled every space my footsteps didn't. 3 days later, an old roommate texted me a photo from Florence. "There's your family," she wrote, half teasing, half fond. Mom and Dad and Natalie smiled under a Tuscan sky, as if smiling were easy. I stared until the colors went flat. That night, when I finally reached my mother, she said, "It was lovely, and then, you know how your father needs to decompress, and then something about perfect timing again, as if the phrase could erase a date on a calendar." The injustice wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with slammed doors or the hiss of whispered names. It built itself out of practical decisions and quiet preferences, a college fund turned off like a faucet, a room repurposed, a watch bestowed in the language of legacy. It arranged itself into a script where one daughter fit and one did not, and no one had to say that out loud to make it real. In Boston, I found an apartment with tall windows and learned to keep basil alive on the sill. Work grew sturdier under my hands. The first time my name appeared in a program for a design event, I mailed a copy home anyway, because hope is a muscle that keeps contracting long after it's been injured. Dad sent a card that said, "Congratulations," typed no note. Mom drove down alone to sit through a ceremony and left before the reception, murmuring about traffic on I-84. I walked back into the hall and clapped for someone else and folded the ache into a smaller shape. I wish I could tell you I confronted them then, that I delivered a speech measured and clean. What I did instead was wait. I waited for the phone to ring on holidays. I waited for a text that remembered a day that mattered to me. I waited for the moment when a door, even a small one, would open again. Waiting can feel like virtue when it's really erosion. The day Natalie's Redbow car popped up on my screen, the bow wasn't the thing that hurt most. It was my parents' faces, easy, certain, unshadowed by doubt. The certainty told a story I finally understood had been writing itself for years. They had chosen the daughter who didn't disrupt the choir. They had crafted a family photo that didn't include a chair for me. They had taught me gently and relentlessly how not to need them. Shadows lengthened across my kitchen. Outside, someone's dog shook water onto a sidewalk, and a child laughed the sound clean as a bell. I put my phone face down and listened to my apartment breathe, radiator ticking, refrigerator hum, the soft complaint of old wood. In a few hours, the city would go blue and quiet, and the ache would do what aches do, settle, then rise again. I didn't know it yet, but that's how isolation starts. Not with a slammed door, but with 1,000 soft closures until the house is warm and lit, and you're standing on the porch, listening to your own breath fog the glass. The night after I saw the red bow, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the radiator. I sat on the couch with the lights off, watching the city move through the glass, one cab light, one passing couple, one lonely window, still awake across the street. Every few minutes, I checked my phone, not because I expected a call, but because habit dies slower than hope. By morning, the ache felt heavier, but clearer, like fog burned off by sunlight. I went to work early, arriving before the cleaning crew finished the hallways. My desk lamp cast a small circle of gold on the drafting table, and for a moment, I let that be enough. It had to be. Weeks passed in a pattern of work sleep and brief dinners with Sam. He tried to fill the silence with easy conversation, small jokes, small kindnesses, but I could tell he felt the distance growing. He'd reach for my hand, and I'd pull away without meaning to. I wasn't angry at him. I just didn't have space left for tenderness. It felt like my heart had been divided into two rooms, one where I still functioned, and another where everything valuable had gone missing. That winter, I called home for the last time before I stopped expecting anything. It was 2 days before Christmas. Snow pressed against the windows, and the city looked soft and forgiving. Mom answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the familiar, careful cheer. "Sweetheart," she said, "I was just thinking about calling you." I could hear music behind her Nat King Cole's voice, smooth and warm. "Are you all together?" I asked. "Yes, everyone's here," she said. "Your dad's carving the roast, and Natalie's setting the table. You should see it. The house looks beautiful." For a second, I pictured the old dining room, the china cabinet polished candles flickering against the window panes. It had always been my favorite sight growing up. "That sounds nice," I said quietly. "You could have come, Kara," she added after a pause. "You're always welcome." I almost laughed. "Mom, you sent the invitation 2 days ago." Her voice tightened. "We didn't think you'd want to drive all that way." I wanted to say, "It's not the drive, Mom. It's the distance." But instead, I said, "Merry Christmas," and hung up before my voice cracked. That night, I made soup for one and ate it on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders. Outside, the snow turned the street into something beautiful but unreachable. The silence continued into spring. I threw myself into work, taking on every project Marcus offered. "You're relentless," he said one evening, shaking his head as he looked over my sketches. "But I like what happens when you're relentless." It was meant as praise, but I heard something else in it, how even my devotion to design came from the same instinct that had once made me chase approval. I didn't know how to want something just for me. When my birthday came that year, I kept it quiet. I met friends for dinner, smiled through the toasts, and walked home alone through the city's evening warmth. Later, lying in bed, I checked my phone one last time. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages, not even a text. 3 days later, Dina texted a photo. My parents and Natalie stood in front of a fountain somewhere in Florence, all sunlit and carefree. "Saw your family in Italy," her message said. Small world. I stared at the image until the edges blurred. They had gone to Europe during my birthday week and hadn't said a word. It shouldn't have surprised me by then, but it did. When I finally called Mom, she answered with her usual gentle brightness. "Oh, it was wonderful," she said. "Your father really needed the break. Natalie had a few days off between cases, so we just decided last minute." "Perfect timing," I said softly. She didn't catch the edge in my voice. Exactly. After that call, I didn't reach out again for months. I told myself I was too busy, that work was my focus. But really, I was tired of rehearsing disappointment. The months that followed were a blur of deadlines and early mornings. My firm landed a hotel renovation project in downtown Boston, and Marcus made me lead designer. It was the biggest opportunity I'd ever had. I poured everything into it, the color palettes, the material choices, the way light would fall through the atrium at noon. For once, I wasn't building for anyone's approval. Sam noticed the shift. One night, he watched me rearrange swatches on the kitchen table long after midnight. You're hiding in it, he said gently. I looked up. Hiding in what? In your work. It's safer than people. He wasn't wrong, but I didn't know how to tell him that safety was the only thing keeping me upright. We drifted apart after that, slowly, kindly, like people folding away a shared chapter. By the time spring turned to summer, I was alone again, but at least the silence was my own. The next family message came through a friend's account by accident. A coworker showed me a video on social media, a short clip of my sister's law firm celebrating her fellowship award. There were my parents in the background, raising champagne glasses, faces glowing with pride. The post was dated my birthday. It took me a full minute to process what I was seeing. They hadn't just forgotten again, they'd chosen another celebration instead. That night, I sat at the kitchen counter with a half-empty glass of wine, scrolling through years of posts I had once ignored. Trips, parties, dinners, family photos. My name appeared in none of them. My face was gone from the hallway portraits, my stories unwritten in the captions. I didn't cry this time. I just watched until the screen dimmed, then whispered, I understand. Isolation doesn't come all at once. It settles gradually like snow, until one morning you realize the whole landscape has changed, and there's no clear way back. When I tried reaching out to relatives, their voices carried a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Aunt Laura said, You know how your father is? Give him time. Uncle Paul muttered something about family pride. None of them wanted to stand in the middle of it. I stopped asking. The next year, I didn't mention my birthday at all. I spent the day at work, then took myself to dinner. The waiter brought a candle on a small plate of chocolate cake, assuming it was a celebration. I smiled and played along. Pretending felt easier than explaining. Later that night, I saw Natalie's post her bar exam celebration. A rooftop party, glittering lights, my parents beside her, proud as ever. The caption read, So grateful for my biggest supporters. I sat in the dark and thought about the word grateful. How heavy it becomes when you realize the people you want to thank aren't the ones who stayed. The months that followed were quieter. I stopped waiting for their calls, stopped sending cards. My life in Boston filled in around the empty spaces. I joined a design collective, adopted a stray cat that slept on my drafting table, learned the sound of my own laughter again. Sometimes, though, the loneliness would sneak back in small ways. A song Mom used to hum while cooking a scent of fresh oranges that reminded me of childhood breakfasts. Those moments could undo me faster than any argument ever had. By my 31st birthday, the silence had hardened into routine. My co-workers decorated my desk with streamers and cupcakes. I smiled, thanked them, even made a toast. But inside, I felt the hollow thrum of something unacknowledged. 3 days later, my mother texted, Was thinking of you. Hope you had a nice birthday. 3 days late, 10 words long. No call, no card. That weekend, I scrolled through Natalie's photos again. Her bar celebration, the diamond earrings, the luxury restaurant. I called Mom on Sunday just to hear her voice. Your sister's party looked amazing, I said, forcing lightness. Oh yes, your father really went all out, she replied. You know how proud he is of her following in his footsteps. I told her about the design certification I'd just earned, the one I'd worked toward for 2 years. Got the highest score in my class, I said. That's nice, honey, she said. But I need to run. We're meeting the Hendersons for brunch. The line went silent before I could answer. I stared at the phone until my reflection blurred in the black screen. Then I placed it face down on the table and went back to sketching layouts. The paper didn't ask for understanding. Isolation had become my normal. I woke up, worked, went to sleep. Days stacked like tiles. But beneath it, something else was forming, a slow, quiet realization that waiting for their love was costing me my own peace. One evening, Marcus stopped by my desk after a client meeting. "You've been different lately," he said. "How so?" "Focused," he said, studying me. "Certain. Like you finally stopped asking permission." I smiled faintly. Maybe I have. That night, walking home through the city, I realized what he meant. For years, I'd built my life like a child, waiting for someone to notice. But no one was coming. I looked up at the skyline, the glass towers glowing against the deep blue, and it hit me. This city, this life, every inch of it had been made by my own hands. Still, when my 32nd birthday arrived, I woke with that same old reflex to check the phone to hope for something different. The screen was empty. My friends at work sang. My team brought cake, but later in the quiet of my apartment, I made the mistake of opening social media. And there it was, Natalie beside the Mercedes with the red bow. My parents glowing beside her, champagne in hand. Their smiles, the same ones I used to know. The caption read, "Thank you, Mom and Dad, for the best birthday gift ever." I stared until my vision blurred. The distance between us was no longer emotional, it was absolute. They had rewritten our family photo, and I wasn't in it. That night, I sat at the window and listened to the river hum beyond the city. For the first time, I felt not sadness, but clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to reach through a locked door. Somewhere inside that silence, a small decision began to form, steady, inevitable, and long overdue. The night I saw that photo of the Mercedes, I sat in the dark for a long time. The city outside looked softer than it felt, lights trembling on the river, the hum of traffic folding into distance. Somewhere between the glow and the quiet, a line formed inside me. Not dramatic, not sharp, just final. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. I brewed coffee, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. The email began with my name and ended with goodbye. Every word between carried the weight of 5 silent years. It wasn't anger that guided my hands, it was exhaustion. I'd spent too long apologizing for wanting to be seen. I read it twice, then hit send before fear could talk me out of it. The sound of the sent notification was small, almost tender, but it felt like thunder rolling through my chest. The rest of that day moved slowly. I walked through work as if under glass. My mind wasn't on layouts or meetings. It hovered somewhere between relief and grief. I kept my phone on silent, knowing the replies would come. When I got home that night, I turned it back on. The first message arrived within the hour. My father's name blinked across the screen. The subject line read, "Your childish tantrum." The message itself was worse cold, clipped each word chosen to cut. He called my email emotional immaturity and said I'd proven why I didn't belong in the family I'd rejected. I deleted it without finishing. Mom's calls followed next 6 in total, each from a different number. I listened to one voicemail, her voice trembling, shifting between pleading and defensiveness. "Kara, I don't understand where this is coming from. You're being unfair. We've always loved you. What am I supposed to tell people?" It wasn't love she was afraid of losing. It was appearance. Natalie's message came last. No greeting, no warmth. "Way to make my birthday week all about you again," she'd written. Always the drama queen. That one stung, not because of what it said, but because of how little it surprised me. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened a blank page on my design tablet and started sketching. Not furniture or interiors, just shapes. Lines intersecting circles overlapping everything in motion. It was the first time in years that I created something without a purpose. Work filled the days that followed. Our firm had landed a contract with a hospitality group expanding across New England, and I'd been chosen to lead the flagship design. It was more than a promotion. It was a quiet acknowledgement that my instincts had value. I stayed late most nights, moving through the blue light of the office, letting creativity replace noise. Marcus noticed. "You've changed," he said one evening, standing in the doorway of my office. "How so?" I asked. "You used to design for approval," he said. "Now you design like you trust yourself." I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally do. 2 days later, as if testing that new strength, my receptionist appeared at my door mid-meeting. "Kara?" she whispered. "There's a woman in the lobby asking for you. Says it's an emergency." When she said the name, I froze. My mother. I found her near the entrance, standing small against the glass wall. Her usual careful composure was gone, hair loose, makeup smudged, eyes swollen. She looked like someone who hadn't slept. "You blocked my calls," she said when she saw me. Her voice cracked. What choice did I have? I led her to a small conference room, closed the door, and waited. The air between us felt dense. She clasped her handbag with both hands like a shield. "I can't lose you," she said quietly. "You already did," I replied. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. 5 years ago. Tears filled her eyes. "It wasn't that simple." "It was exactly that simple," I said. "You celebrated Natalie and ignored me. For years. You replaced my name in your stories and pretended it didn't matter." She covered her face with her hands. "I failed you," she whispered. "I thought keeping peace was protecting everyone. Your father? He's not easy when he's angry." I exhaled slowly. "So you let me carry it instead." She nodded once, unable to meet my eyes. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the office leaked faintly through the wall phones, ringing printers, humming, life continuing. Finally, she looked up. "Can we fix this?" she asked. "Is it too late?" I didn't answer right away. I was tired of quick forgiveness that never led anywhere. "I don't know what fixed would look like," I said. "But if there's a chance, it starts with honesty, therapy, boundaries, real accountability." She nodded, eyes down. "Your father won't like that." "Then he can stay where he is," I said quietly. "But if he wants to know me again, that's the only way." When she left, I felt hollow, but lighter. The kind of emptiness that means something has shifted. 3 days later, my father called. His voice was as I remembered it, measured, professional. Every sentence an argument he expected to win. "Your mother insists we speak," he said. "I've agreed to therapy. For her sake." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. The first session was worse than I'd imagined. The therapist's office smelled faintly of cedar and tea. My mother sat with her hands clasped. My father leaned back with arms crossed, and I tried to breathe evenly. "You feel your parents excluded you?" the therapist said gently. I laughed once quietly. "I don't feel it. I lived it." Dad's voice cut through the room. "She's exaggerating. We provided every opportunity. She chose to abandon her path. The consequence for changing a college major shouldn't be losing a family," I said. His jaw tightened. For the first time, the therapist intervened. "Mr. Williams," she asked, "how would you feel if your firm cut all ties with you for handling a case differently than your partners preferred?" He didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the carpet. Progress came slowly. Some sessions ended in silence, others in shouting. He walked out twice, and I stopped expecting breakthroughs. But my mother stayed. She started listening, not to respond, but to understand. and that was something. Natalie joined once late in the process. She arrived tense, defensive, her perfume filling the small room. "You have no idea what it was like," she said suddenly. "Living in your shadow. Perfect Kara, brilliant Kara. Then you quit and left me to make up for it." Her voice broke mid-sentence, surprising both of us. "I thought you had everything I said softly. I didn't realize you were trying to survive the same pressure from a different angle." For the first time in years, we looked at each other and saw something other than blame. The sessions stretched over months. Some days I dreaded them. Other days I left with cautious hope. The distance between us didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It stopped being a wall and became something like a hallway, still narrow, but with light at one end. Work became a refuge again, but this time without hiding. My design for the flagship hotel took form: warm wood, soft light textures that invited touch. When the client approved the final plan, Marcus called it my best work yet. I thought of all the nights I'd spent trying to earn a father's pride that never came, and I smiled. Maybe that pride was mine to claim now. Michael entered my life around that time. He was a landscape architect with kind eyes and the patience of someone who understood silence. We met during a joint project, and conversation came easy. He never asked for details I wasn't ready to give. He just listened. With him, I felt something I hadn't in years: ease. One evening, after another long therapy session, I met him by the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, and the air smelled of rain. I told him I wasn't sure if my family and I would ever fully reconcile. He squeezed my hand gently. "Maybe that's not the goal," he said. "Maybe peace isn't everyone changing. It's you not needing them to." The words stayed with me. Months later, near my 33rd birthday, my phone rang at dawn. It was my mother. Her voice sounded calm, certain. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said. "I hope today brings you peace." A few hours later, an envelope arrived, my father's handwriting on the front. Inside was a card and a short note. "Proud of your recent work. Keep building. No lecture, no pretense. Just words that didn't hurt to read." Natalie texted later that afternoon. "Thinking of you today. Gift card to your favorite design store. Hope it helps with your next project." Simple, kind. They were small gestures, but after 5 years of nothing, they felt like sunlight through a door once sealed shut. That night, I hosted a quiet dinner at home. Friends filled the room: Dina, Marcus, Michael, and laughter warmed the air. Mom arrived with a bottle of wine, and for the first time, no excuses. Dad didn't come, and that was all right. When the candles flickered low, I looked around the table and realized something I'd never dared believe before: love could exist without conditions. As we raised our glasses, the hum of the city faded into the background. I no longer felt like a daughter waiting at the edge of someone else's life. I felt whole, standing in my own. The journey wasn't finished. Some wounds don't close neatly, but the silence had turned into conversation, and for the first time, it sounded like truth. Outside the window, snow began to fall, light, slow, forgiving. And somewhere inside that quiet, I felt something close to peace. The first snow of January came quietly that year, the kind that muted the city until every sound felt hushed. I stood at my apartment window that morning, coffee cooling in my hands, watching flakes dissolve against the glass. Life had grown gentler since my last birthday. There were no more sleepless nights waiting for messages that never came. Just quiet mornings, long walks, and a home that finally felt like my own. Mom called every Sunday now. Sometimes we talked for an hour, sometimes only 15 minutes. But it was real. No tiptoeing around emotions, no pretending. She asked about work, about Michael, about the little things. The steadiness of it healed more than any apology ever could. Dad was slower to change. He joined a few therapy sessions after months of resistance, sitting stiff and defensive in Dr. Levine's small office, eyes fixed on the bookshelf behind her desk. But something had started to shift. It was in the way his shoulders dropped when I spoke, in the way he didn't argue every point. One evening, after a session, as we left the building, he said, "You've built quite a life, Kara." There was no lecture hidden inside the sentence, just observation. It was the first time I'd heard pride that didn't cost me something. Michael and I spent most weekends together by then, working on our joint project for the city, a public garden that merged landscape with art. He had a way of finding beauty in what others ignored: a rusted gate, a cracked sidewalk, a wild vine curling through chain link. Things grow where they can, he liked to say. It reminded me of how I'd learned to grow too. Still, healing wasn't linear. There were days when old memories crept in, birthdays, missed holidays that hurt more than they should. Sometimes, late at night, I'd scroll through old photos before I could stop myself. My mother's smile, my father's proud stance, Natalie's bright eyes, all of it from a time when we were still pretending everything was fine. I'd stare until the faces blurred and close the laptop, reminding myself those images didn't own me anymore. One morning in March, an unexpected email arrived. The subject line read, "Lunch." It was from Natalie. I stared at it for a long time before answering. We hadn't spoken directly since the therapy sessions ended months earlier. Her message was short, just a date, a cafe in the city, and one line, "I owe you a conversation." When the day came, I arrived first. The cafe was warm and filled with the low hum of conversation. I sat by the window, watching slush drip from the awning outside. Natalie arrived 5 minutes late, cheeks pink from the cold, wearing the same confident stride she'd always had. But something about her looked different. Softer, maybe. She ordered tea and sat across from me, hands wrapped around the cup. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled and said, "I've been thinking about what you said in therapy, about me never standing up for you." Her voice wavered slightly. "You were right." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. "I thought keeping Dad happy was survival," she continued. "But it turned me into someone I don't like very much. Everything I did, law school, the firm, it was about keeping his approval. When you left, I told myself you were selfish. But really, I was just scared you'd figured out how to be free." She laughed then quietly. "Turns out, freedom's harder than I thought." I felt a small ache behind my ribs. "It is," I said, "but it's worth it." She nodded, eyes shining. "I wanted you to know I'm sorry for staying silent, for pretending I didn't see what was happening. I can't change the past, but I want to do better. Forgiveness doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of understanding." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "That's all I ever wanted," I said. "For you to see it." We talked for 2 hours about work, about Mom, even about Dad, who was still learning how to exist without being in control. By the time we left, the snow had stopped and the city shimmered in pale sunlight. We walked in silence for a block before she hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that feels like a promise. When I got home, Michael was cooking dinner. He looked up from the stove when I walked in. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected," I said. "We might finally be okay." He smiled and handed me a wooden spoon. "Taste this. Tell me if it needs salt." The simplicity of the moment, the scent of garlic, the warmth of his kitchen grounded me. For years, love had felt like something I had to earn. Now, it felt like this steady quiet shared. In the weeks that followed, life kept unfolding in small, steady ways. Mom came to visit in April, bringing an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. We sat on the couch, flipping through pages of birthdays and vacations of two little girls with matching ribbons in their hair. Some pictures made us laugh. Others made us cry. At one point, she closed the album and said, "You know your father's been trying to talk about those years? I think he finally sees how much he hurt you." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I wanted that conversation yet, but I knew I'd have it when I was ready. May brought color back to the city, the first warm evenings, cafe tables crowding the sidewalks, tulips blooming in the park. Michael proposed on a quiet Friday night in the garden we'd designed together. He'd hidden the ring inside a small glass lantern near the pond, its flame trembling against the water. When he knelt, the whole world seemed to slow. "Kara," he said softly, "you've spent years building a life that feels like home. Let me be part of it." I said yes, not because it completed me, but because it met me where I already stood whole, but still open. Mom cried when I told her. Natalie offered to help plan. Dad sent a short message. "Congratulations. I hope he treats you well." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cruel either. For him, that was progress. As summer came, I found myself spending more time in quiet reflection. I'd sit on the balcony after work, watching light slide across the buildings, thinking about how far we'd all come. Healing had turned out to be less about fixing the past and more about accepting its shape. The jagged edges remained, but they no longer cut the same way. A few weeks before the wedding, Dad called. His voice was softer than I remembered. "I'd like to walk you down the aisle," he said, "if that's something you'd want." I hesitated, the old instinct to protect myself rising fast. But I heard something in his tone that wasn't control. It was humility. "I think I'd like that," I said, finally. The day of the wedding was warm, and gold sunlight threading through the garden trees. Friends gathered in rows of wooden chairs, laughter mingling with the scent of lilacs. Mom fussed over my veil. Natalie fixed my bouquet. When Dad arrived, he looked older but lighter. He offered his arm with a small, uncertain smile. "You look beautiful, Kara." I met his eyes and smiled back. "Thank you, Dad." When we reached the aisle, he whispered, "I'm sorry for everything I couldn't see." His voice shook. "You deserved better." The ceremony blurred after that vows applause, the taste of champagne. What I remember most is the feeling that filled the air, something between closure and grace. Later that night, as the music faded and candles burned low, I stepped outside alone for a moment. The garden glowed softly, lanterns swaying in the breeze. I thought about the long road that had led here, the arguments, the silence, the letter I'd once written in pain. And now this. A life rebuilt not perfectly, but truthfully. Michael found me there, slipping his arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," I said quietly. "For the first time, I really am." We stood there until the last song ended, the night wrapping around us like something sacred. Behind us, laughter drifted from the hall. Ahead of us, the dark horizon shimmered with the faint light of dawn. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was looking back. I was simply standing in the middle of everything I had fought for: peace, love, and the freedom to finally be seen. The morning after the wedding, the garden was still. Dew clung to the blades of grass, and the lanterns from the night before flickered faintly in the pale light. Michael and I sat on the stone steps overlooking the pond, shoes off coffee mugs warming our hands. The world felt hushed, like even the birds were catching their breath. Somewhere behind us, laughter drifted from the house, Mom helping Natalie clean up the clatter of dishes, soft music playing low. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over me. For the first time in years, it didn't ache. It simply existed like background music from a life that had finally steadied. Michael leaned his shoulder against mine. "You ready to start this new chapter?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I think I already did," I said. Later, after the guests left and the house emptied, I found Dad standing alone in the garden near the arbor. He was still in his dress shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie undone. For a moment, he didn't notice me. He was watching the water expression unreadable. When he turned, his eyes looked softer, less guarded, almost human in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. "You threw a beautiful wedding," he said. "We did," I replied, emphasizing the we. He nodded. "Your mother said you chose all this." He gestured around him, the flowers, the lights, the music that still hummed faintly from the speakers. It felt like peace. I hesitated before answering. That's what I wanted it to feel like. There was a long pause. He cleared his throat. "I haven't been a good father," he said, eyes fixed on the pond. "I thought I was protecting you by being strict, by setting expectations. But really, I was protecting myself from watching you become someone I couldn't control." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. "I know," I said, "and I don't need perfection, just honesty." He met my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "I can do that." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I believed him. When he walked back toward the house, I stayed by the water, watching the morning light deepen into gold. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew whatever it was, it would be mine to choose. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life settled into something simple and full. I returned to work still wearing the quiet calm of the wedding like an invisible veil. Marcus greeted me with a grin. "Mrs. Lane now," he teased, leaning against my office door. "How does it feel?" "Peaceful," I said. "Like I can finally breathe." He laughed softly. "You always could. You just forgot for a while." At home, Michael and I built small routines: coffee on the balcony at dawn, shared dinners after long days, walks through the park where we'd first met. There was an ease between us that didn't need grand declarations. Just the steady presence of two people choosing each other day after day. One evening in late summer, Mom came to visit alone. She arrived with a basket of peaches from a roadside stand and a box of old photographs. We sat on the porch while the sky turned amber, flipping through images of birthdays and beach trips of me holding Natalie's hand in the backyard. "I've been cleaning out the attic," she said, smiling faintly. "Found these in a box labeled for later." I guess later finally came. I traced my finger over one photo, Dad holding me on his shoulders, both of us laughing. I couldn't remember the exact day, but the feeling was still there. "Thank you for keeping them," I said. She nodded, her voice soft. "You were always the one who held us together. We just didn't see it." I smiled, the kind that holds both sorrow and grace. "You see it now. That's enough." When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. "I'm proud of the woman you've become," she whispered. The words settled over me like warm sunlight. Natalie called more often after that. Sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask advice. She had started teaching a class on family law at the local college, wanting to help people before things break. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but there was sincerity in her voice that made me believe she meant it. One afternoon, she sent me a message that read, "Thanks for showing me how to rebuild without pretending." I replied with a simple heart. There wasn't much more to say. By early autumn, the garden Michael and I had designed together was complete. The city held a small opening ceremony. Children ran through the paths and the fountains caught the afternoon light. As I watched them, I thought about the years it took to arrive here, the pain, the distance, the rebuilding. Every part of it had led to this space full of laughter and life. After the speeches ended, a little girl handed me a flower she'd picked from the border. "It's for you," she said. I thanked her, tucking it behind my ear. The scent of jasmine lingered in the breeze. That evening, as twilight spread across the city, Michael and I walked home hand in hand. He glanced at me and said, "You look happy." "I am," I said. "Not because everything's perfect, but because I finally stopped trying to fix what isn't mine to fix." He smiled, understanding, without needing more words. The days grew shorter, the air crisp, with approaching fall. I found comfort in small things, the smell of coffee, the scratch of pencil on poson paper, the steady rhythm of life unfolding without apology. On a quiet Sunday morning, I stood by the window of our apartment, watching golden leaves drift down to the street below. My reflection in the glass looked different, calmer, grounded. The woman who once begged for her family's approval was gone. In her place stood someone who had built peace from the ruins. Later that day, I drove to visit my parents. They'd invited me for dinner, no occasion, just dinner. The house looked the same, but the energy felt lighter. Mom greeted me with a warm hug. Dad was in the kitchen stirring sauce. Natalie arrived shortly after with a bottle of wine and a bouquet from her garden. The conversation flowed easily, laughter filling the gaps where tension used to live. At one point, Dad lifted his glass. "To family," he said. "Not the one we thought we were, but the one we're still learning to be." We clinked glasses, and I felt something inside me settle, an old ache finally finding its rest. When the evening ended, I stepped outside first. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Behind me, the soft glow of the kitchen lights spilled onto the porch. I turned once, just to take it in, the sight of them talking together, unforced, real. Driving home, the roads were quiet. The moon hung low, painting the world in silver. I rolled the window down, letting the wind tangle my hair, and thought about everything that had led here. The silence, the heartbreak, the boundaries, the forgiveness that had come not from surrender, but from self-respect. Some wounds don't fade because we forget they fade, because we finally let go of needing them to heal in a certain way. When we pulled into the driveway, Michael reached for my hand. "Home," he said simply. I nodded. Home. We walked inside, the soft hum of the city fading behind us. I lit a candle on the table, its flames small but steady, casting a circle of light across the room. The scent of jasmine still lingered from the flower the little girl had given me, and outside, the first stars began to bloom against the dark. Peace, I realized, wasn't something found. It was something made choice by choice, boundary by boundary, until one day you look around and realize the noise is gone. If this story spoke to you, tell me where you're listening from down in the comments. And if you've ever had to choose peace over approval, I'd love to hear how you found it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that begins with self-respect.